the wormwood demon thought, I am winning. But now the more experienced demon, the Screwtape demon, is not that happy. It tells the wormwood that this experience can only be to our advantage if we take advantage of it. They live in time, and so the law of undulation, that means the law of ups and downs, is so natural to the human experience. It is easier to influence a believer that his obedience is more based on the ecstasy, but it is so hard for a believer who has learned to obey despite the feelings. So yes, they are losing faith, but the faith that they are losing, remember what happened with Christ on the cross. Have you found yourself in a situation where you all of a sudden felt God is not present? Your devotion seems to be lifeless, your prayer life seems to be lifeless, and it's mostly after a season where you feel the vibrancy, where you get out of worship experience and you literally feel God's presence. You're just reading your word and you feel the presence of God, and then all of a sudden everything feels dry. C.S. Lewis tackles this issue in his Screwtape letters that he wrote, and he uses fictional demons to bring life or to bring meaning to this experience. And so we have the two demons. The first demon is an experienced demon. He's called the Screwtape, and his nephew, the inexperienced demon, called the wormwood. And then they have their patient, and then there is God, who they refer to as the enemy. And so it's after wormwood has written a letter to the Screwtape demon, and the Screwtape demon is responding to it. And so the wormwood demon was more excited that his patient, who was a Christian, that his life was going down, his spiritual life was going down. He did not enjoy prayer, he did not enjoy doing the spiritual things that he used to enjoy. And so the wormwood demon thought, I am winning, and it's a win for me because he's losing his faith. But now the more experienced demon writes back a letter to explain more about what was happening, and the Screwtape demon is not that happy, he's not that excited as the wormwood, most probably because he's experienced and he knows what all this means. And so he tells the wormwood that this experience can only be to our advantage if we take advantage of it, because he says that for the human beings, they are both spiritual and they are physical, they are human, and they live in time. And so the law of undulation, that means the law of ups and downs, is so natural to the human experience. And mostly he explains that now the enemy, who is God, uses even the troughs, the low seasons, more than the peak seasons. And he explains to wormwood that the experience that is happening now to his patient can yield to a disaster to the demon, or they can take advantage, because he explains that if you know the intention of the enemy in the situation using that trap, whatever he wants to achieve in that patient, now what you have to do now as the demon, you have to do the opposite of it. So if God wants to achieve deeper intimacy, what now the demon should do is to make sure he does the opposite. And now that's what he starts to explain now to the demon. And he says that if this believer continues in their devotion, despite of the way they feel they're very far away from God, if they continue in their obedience, then that means that their faith will be more strong in God and not be reliant to anything else, because he says that it is easier to influence a believer that his obedience is more based on the ecstasy, but it is so hard for a believer who has learned to obey despite the feelings. So he says that it is more hard to influence the believer who has already gotten the conviction that despite of the feeling he has for God, he still will remain there. Because he explains that now the enemy, who is God, he does not override the will of man. What he does is that he woos them. So he introduces them to that season of ecstasy. Mostly when you give your life to Christ, and also throughout your journey, you might face these seasons. And so what he explains is that God introduces the season. And so after introducing that season, he withdraws it. Not because he's absent, but he takes away the consciousness of who he is to that person. It's not that God has gone away from that patient. He's still there. But what God now is teaching the believer is now to stand on their grounds. Now you do not need to have that emotion to obey. Can you still obey God despite of the lowly moments that we'll have? Can you still stand on your grounds? Can you still have faith and put your belief in the being of who God is? So when the patient learns to have faith in God despite of anything, then their faith is purified. Yes, they are losing faith, but the faith that they are losing is the faith that you have in the perceived God. So their faith that they are losing is the faith that is more based on emotions, and what they are gaining is a refined faith, a faith that does not rely on emotions to continue obeying. And he explains that now that's the dangerous thing to us. But if you want to take advantage of it, now he's advising the other demon. If you want to take advantage of this situation, what you can do is make the believer believe that what he's feeling is actually his reality. So if he feels he's absent from God, then let him believe. So the moment they believe that, then you've won, because they will now get away from prayer. They will not be praying. And most of the times we always think that maybe it's because I've sinned against God, that's why I feel like he's absent. But one thing I will need us to know is that it's in the plan of God. He is using everything. He can use anything. And so he chooses to use darkness to, or that absence from him, to teach us true and genuine faith. So the moment you're in that season, continue believing, continue showing up, continue praying, continue reading the word. In that point where you still in obedience and you're still in the discipline, despite not feeling the presence of God, what is happening is that you're building a faith that is genuine, that is not based on emotion, and is now based on who God is. And that is now when even if the devil brings any situation around your life, you cannot be shaken, because you're standing on a solid ground. This is what Paul says, that we do not walk by sight, but we walk by faith. We do not walk by the sensory perceptions. We do not walk by that ecstasy, that high, that no, we obey regardless. Even if it does not profit us, maybe we still obey. And you should understand that God is a master of using even the dark moments and the moments that we feel like we're in darkness to bring more light and to bring more salvation. Remember what happened with Christ on the cross. It's evil men that killed Jesus. It's the evil intention of the devil to kill Jesus, but through it receives a salvation. Through it, death and sin was defeated. So learn to embrace the darkness.